The Capital Confidential podcast is brought to you by the Times-Union, the leading newspaper in New York's capital region. Subscribe today or visit online at timesunion.com.
What I do is basically we just have a conversation. Afterwards, I'll trim it, cut out some of the ums and ahs, any stutters, whatever. If somebody goes on a crazy tangent about your great Aunt Mildred, we'll probably cut that out. And just hopefully about a tight 20 to 25 minute podcast. Any questions before we start recording?
You want to deport an undocumented person? Start with me, because I'm an undocumented person.
How do we beat him in an election?
We will. I'm going to run against him.
I wish you would. I wish you would, Dad. I would.
There are things in here that are unobjectionable because they're not that effective. So yeah, sure, I'll vote for a distinctive license plate. Sure, why not?
Jim, you had your press conference at 4 o'clock.
You're having a press conference now?
That's
You're
right.
talking?
I'm having a press conference.
Well,
now.
is this your space here or is it public?
No, it's my space.
Oh, this is your
Don't
space.
interrupt.
Okay.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is the Capital Confidential podcast. My guest this week is Assemblyman Ed Ra, a Long Island Republican who has served as Assistant Minority Leader Pro Tem since the 2018 legislative session. In this capacity, the 37-year-old plays a vital role in preparing the GOP floor debates and managing their floor activity. I had the Assemblyman on to discuss this job and what life is like for him when the Assembly is in session. We talked about his goals during a debate, the preparation involved in his job, and trying to keep up in a chamber that moves hundreds of bills in the waning days of the legislative session. Enjoy the show. What was your thoughts about taking on the role that would kind of put you in, I guess, the spotlight for a lot of the debates, leading the Assembly Republican debates? Were there people that you looked to as, examples for the right way to do the job? Were there expectations you had? What were your thoughts coming into this?
I had the opportunity to fill in a couple of times back in, I guess, the 2017 session, and I've always, tried to, when I stand up on the floor, be prepared, know what I'm talking about, but always try to be very respectful of my colleagues. So, when Tom McKevitt, who was in a neighboring district to mine, who I know a long time, ran for the county legislature back in 2017. He had been our floor leader at the time, and Andy Goodell was his assistant. And Leader Kolb moved Andy up and asked me to take on the role of assistant, which I was A, honored to do, but B, I knew it would give me an opportunity to really be in the thick of things, which I liked. It's one of the things I like most about the job is policy and legislating and discussing and learning about issues. And I think, I always, as I'm doing the job, I think back to my first term when Jim Conte, who was from Suffolk, was our floor leader. Mark Molinaro was actually the assistant at the time. That was before he ran for county executive. But I remember just the way Jim conducted himself on the floor. He was another Long Island Republican, sometimes was a little more moderate than many of our upstate colleagues, and he had a way of being tough and standing up for a conference when he needed to, but also being respectful and even at times raising points on a bill that maybe he knew a lot of our conference was opposed to, but maybe he wasn't personally. Maybe he was going to vote for it, but he had a way of raising the points in a respectful manner, and putting those points on the record without necessarily getting his personal feelings in the way. So that's one of the people I think I most look to as an example.
Have you found yourself in that situation yet, where you are arguing or bringing up points that maybe you don't agree with, but the sort of the conference positions?
I have. When me and Andy Goodell are preparing for a calendar on any given week, or trying to see who's going to debate a particular bill, oftentimes maybe Andy will have voted one way and I'll have voted another, and he'll say, are you okay debating this? And I I never really have an issue, debating a bill because there's still points that I think need to be raised. I think there's very few perfect bills, even if it's a bill that I'm going to vote for on balance. But it's I think you want to also provide that level of cover for our other colleagues as well. If
What do you mean cover?
Occasionally, that probably the whole conference is voting no on something.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe sometimes there's a handful, or maybe so you don't want to go say, oh, this is the worst bill ever for X, Y, and Z. You want to raise legitimate points, issues, and keep it on the issue rather than anything personal between sponsors or anything political, especially in as you can imagine these times, the politics of it and can very much things that are going on well outside, not just the Assembly chamber, but outside of New York State can bleed into things a lot.
Do you think that the debates have grown testier in the Assembly following the election of Donald Trump in 2016?
I think they have at times, yes.
Is that just because of a more charged political atmosphere?
I think the political atmosphere is more charged, and I do think that, for instance, in 2017, a lot of the things we were doing early on were reacting to those first few months of the Trump administration. If you remember, the Assembly took up a sanctuary state bill very early on in that session. So there was a reaction going on to things going on at the federal level. There was, they made sure that the Reproductive Health Act at the time and contraceptive coverage and things like that came up early in the session. So there was definitely a reaction to what was going on in Washington. And then, you saw it also this session, in particular when we got into the tax return issue and the double jeopardy bill.
And the release of taxes by candidates, whether it's for president or other office, has been kind of maybe a tradition, but not something that was legally required. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that the president decided not to release his taxes, and he was elected president. So the voters had the opportunity to decide whether they were okay with electing somebody president without seeing their taxes. They saw fit to elect the person president. We are now setting down a path yesterday and today that we are doing political work from the legislature. We are trying to get the headlines and talk about how we're going after this administration. It's just not the way we should be governing. My colleague mentioned all the problems we have as a state. That should be our focus. Our constituents should be our focus. It shouldn't be this and going after for political purposes because everybody's just so obsessed with this tax return that we can't even focus on the problems that we need to be addressing both here and in Washington. I vote no. Thank you.
Mr. Ra, the next.
What is your goal with a debate? Is it just to bring up salient points and then lose the vote? Is it to potentially sway enough Democrats to abandon ship? Where do you hope these, discussions end up?
A lot of times it's just bringing up points that perhaps the sponsor hasn't thought of, or perhaps other members of the majority conference haven't thought of. Maybe there's a bill that's coming out that's reflective of some policy that has been implemented in New York City, and they want to take it statewide. Well, it's not always gonna fit in so neatly in other parts of the state. So sometimes it's raising those types of points. I think it's changed a little bit with the Democrats taking over the Senate, because there were times in the past when we would be raising points that I think were going to have an impact on whether the Senate is going to take up a bill, because they might look and see, oh, geez, these other Republicans were all against this. What's the story here? And they might be less likely to take up a bill, or maybe those points do become opportunities to make amendments to a bill and make it something that is more workable. I think the smart legislators on the majority side recognize that, and many of them will come over to us even before you get to a debate, just by virtue of the fact that, as you may be familiar, we go through a calendar and bills come out. We'll have our bills on consent, and then we'll have bills we lay aside for debate. So right there is, an initial opportunity to maybe have a discussion as to what our objections might be to a particular bill. And I think the better legislators on the majority side will come over and have that conversation on the front end, and then maybe they may come over to us and say, that's a good point. Here's an amendment I'm looking at. What do you think? A perfect example. You had mentioned you had spoken to Amy Poland recently, and I went and listened to your podcast with her. She is one that on a regular basis, Amy's a smart legislator and obviously has had a lot of success getting bills through. And she would come over after we lay aside a bill and ask us our objections and take some notes and come back over to us the next week or whatever and say, I'm kicking around this idea. What do you think of this? And I think the end result is a piece of legislation that is more workable for a state as diverse as New York.
What goes into preparing for the debates? I imagine it's more comprehensive for more controversial bills, but how into the weeds are you getting on some of this stuff?
Very much on some things. I think this is going to be an interesting thing as things go into next year. Now that we've had so many bills that were Assembly majority bills for years that we kind of knew at the time weren't going anywhere in the Senate. So you'd have these bills that we had debated and voted on. I've been in the Assembly 9 years. There were bills this year that are, either got signed into law or maybe are going to get signed into law that we had voted on 9 times. Something like that. Our first thing is really we'll go back and look at past debate transcripts and see what the discussion was like and see where what points need to be put on the record, but also maybe there's things that came up in that debate that maybe we were asking there was some study ongoing or the federal government hadn't acted on something and you go back and look at, what has changed in those particular policy areas. But on top of that, it's, a lot of research utilizing everything from studies to one of the things I looked at a lot this session was the National Conference of State Legislatures. They have tons of stuff online. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these issues are stuff that other state legislatures are dealing with all over the country, and they have a lot of information that can just break down, what different states are doing. So, we do a lot of research. Sitting next to somebody like Andy Goodell, who is one of the smartest guys I've ever met, but really likes to have a lot of research in front of him when he's debating a bill, and he keeps his interns and staff very busy doing that throughout the session.
Is it ever get, discouraging, the process of doing this? I can't think of a lot of assembly bills that, fail. You have issues like the farm workers bill that was debated at the end of session this year, had Assembly Democrats even standing up saying, I got a lot of problems with this bill, and it's just sort of advanced through. Or just during the budget process, you hear it, all through the night on bills that are going to get through. But so how do you, get up for those fights every time? And is it ever just kind of depressing?
It can be, discouraging at times, especially in a year like this one where there's kind of a new reality to deal with. But I think at the end of the day, we still take very seriously that role of being kind of the opposition, not always the case. There are a lot of issues that happened this year that many of us wanted to see happen, but there's still an importance to laying certain points on the record, and making sure that when a bill's passed, that the legislative history is clear on things. So I think we try to do that sometimes, and you raise your points as best you can, and you hope that whether probably not going to change that immediate vote, but maybe it leads to down the line something, chapter amendment or some other piece of legislation that maybe will clean something up or make it more workable. I think we kind of engage maybe at times in a public editing process, and in that way, as you saw already this year, there were bills that were brought forward that had chapter amendments that came forward later on, and sometimes the chapter amendments end up looking a lot like points that got raised on the floor. I can think of a couple of examples. One in particular that Andy Goodell brought up some points last year on, and basically we ended up this year doing a chapter amendment, doing exactly what he was suggesting.
What was that bill?
It was actually about it was a Lyme disease bill. Assemblywoman Barrett had brought forward about putting signage up in parks. At the time, Andy said, the way this is written, the definitions are very expansive, and essentially you'd be requiring these to be put up at, on snowmobile trails and things of that nature.
On the bill, Mr. Goodell.
Ironically, this bill is both too broad and too narrow at the same time. It's too broad because it requires a sign warning of the dangers of ticks at every single trailhead, intersecting trail, ski trails, snowmobile trails, anything under any park that's maintained by the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation.
And actually, the governor, in his approval message, said, it was one of those that I'm asking for a chapter amendment, and basically reflected the point Andy was making.
That bill was delivered to the governor, I think, last week, and it's sitting on his desk right now, waiting to be signed. Yeah, it basically said, if there's not actually a danger of Lyme disease in this state park, you don't need to put up the sign.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
What sort of approach do you take in these debates in terms of, your personality? Because theoretically, there are times when you could come at this with a real gotcha. You could be hostile, you could be funny. Those are different options people have. So what's the Ed Ra approach, and is it always the same?
It's not always the same. I have the issues that are the ones that are kind of my core issues that I'm the most knowledgeable about, and I think I maybe approach those a little differently, like, education, having spent several years as the ranker on the education committee. I feel I have a certain level of expertise and experience, so I'm probably more likely to get deeper into the weeds on something like that. Same with maybe some of the health bills, having served on the health committee for a long time. And then other things, that there are certainly issues that there's a little bit more of passion and emotion behind, specific bills, which tends to bleed through as well. But I also have a lot of really close relationships I've developed on the other side of the aisle over the past few years. So, like, for instance, I led off the debate in the Assembly on the green light bill, but the sponsor, Marcos Crespo, is a good friend, somebody that I've had tons of great discussions on different issues, regardless of how we personally felt about them, and that's going to be, not that I wouldn't have been respectful to him to begin with, but I think we had a very respectful exchange with each other because we know each other. I think he knows I wasn't, trying to play, any games with him. I was trying to just lay out certain parameters of what the bill was going to do and certain concerns that we had on our side of the aisle.
What's it like for those usually social issues that are debated that often become very contentious? They seem very emotional, often on both sides. So how do you, go about those debates? And has it ever been tough for you to handle those debates?
Yeah, I some of them are tougher, and many of the issues, who in our conferences is really, not that everybody doesn't have, a passionate opinion about them, but at this point, who is really likely interested in really debating the issues and things like that. Like when we did the Reproductive Health Act this year, we've had both that bill and other bills related to it that we had a good idea who in our conference was really most passionate and was going to be most interested in being involved in the debate. But it does those types of debates do, I think, take a lot out of you emotionally on the floor, because it's on both sides. There were things that people had worked on for a long time that they felt like were finally getting through. So it does make for a very emotional debate on the floor. I mean, probably none more so than the Child Victims Act this year. I mean, that was we had colleagues who were, telling their own personal stories, and it's just, these are people, and it's, hard for, personal feelings and your empathy for those individuals not to come into your consciousness. But I think overall, and given that environment, I think things were very civil on the floor this year. We had a few flare-ups, but I think we kept it mostly professional and civil.
When there are cases where Assembly Democrats, are starting to break ranks, and even especially speaking out against bills, like we had the Westchester County filibuster this year, we have Charles Barron speaking up. What's your sort of approach to kind of leveraging that? Is it just let it ride? Do you try to piggyback on it? What do you do, if anything?
The Westchester one, I think I will probably never forget that debate, if for no other reason that, Assemblyman Pretlow getting up with that, written piece of that amendment that he walked up to the desk, which was something I'd never seen before. And I'm just, because the other side of it is myself and Andy are, trying to be informed, and Andy knows very well, as I'm not as knowledgeable as he is, but the rules of the chamber and all that stuff. That was a really, really interesting one. And I think we see certain opportunities there when something like that happens. Maybe more so at the committee level, because you on the floor it's very difficult to turn 20, 25 people that might be necessary, as opposed to in a committee, where you can. If you can move a handful here or there, you might be able to actually defeat a bill at the committee level. But it does kind of cause conversations to take place between us and some of our colleagues. Just sometimes you don't even necessarily understand fully the background of that. I mean, that was one that we heard. Okay, Westchester's unhappy with this bill, and you heard some rumors that they were planning on really showing their dissatisfaction, but I didn't necessarily expect what I saw. Having participated in that debate myself, more so just raising points on behalf of some of my local hospitals I had heard from. Mm-hmm. It was definitely different. We don't get a lot of those when you have people kind of in the mix on both sides of the aisle, pro and con. One of the other ones that was really interesting a few years ago was the National Popular Vote Bill, when you had people on both sides of the aisle that were, passionately for it, passionately against it. It makes things a lot more interesting than when the lines are just completely, drawn politically.
Has there been a bill since you've been there where you've been watching the votes come in and you've thought to yourself, oh man, I think this one might fail? Or do you know the Assembly's practices well enough that you don't let yourself get that kind of optimism?
I generally would say that we know that they're going to round up the votes, but we've seen some that you really are sitting there and wondering where we sit. We actually have the active count in front of us, which is our colleagues are, when we do get something close, they're coming over and asking us how many they have up and all of that. Probably the one that was the most kind of really how is this going to finally resolve itself was way back my I guess it was my second year, the Tier 6 vote. That vote was up for a couple hours after we had been in session all night. There was a lot of members of the majority who did not want to vote for it, and it just sat out there for a couple hours. Ultimately, obviously, it passed, but it's rare. But we've seen a couple of those. But after 9 years, I'm usually pretty confident. Even some of our new members who would come over a couple times this year and say, "Oh, this one may fail." I'm like, just they'll figure it out. They might have to go get people out of their offices. They may have to call people back who are whatever, but they'll get there. But there are times with that when I certainly don't envy Crystal's job or Joe Morelli's before that, because it'll in June we can be moving very, very rapidly, and then you get one of those controversial bills, and all of a sudden everything just grinds to a halt until enough people on the majority side get in the chamber so that they can pass the bill.
And is it fair to say that if there is a situation where it's going to be a tight vote, and even if there's some Assembly Republicans who might support that bill, that it seems like sometimes they hold off voting until Democrats have gotten to their 76 on their own? Is that a fair assessment of what happens?
Yeah, I think people have done that. We haven't really, at least in my recollection, done too much of that as kind of a formal conference thing, but we have, I remember, where I used to sit prior to moving over where I am now, it was mostly Long Island representatives, and there were times that we'd know that maybe a lot of our conference was voting no, but we were voting yes, and we'd say, all right, let's hold our votes and see, because we knew maybe the majority might have a little issue, maybe amongst 8 or 10 of us. And there were times when my first term we had 51 members, so it was things were a little more interesting when you had a decent sized group that were holding their votes.
How do you keep up in June when you guys are passing bills at what is a lightning speed for the Assembly?
Well, I would answer that very differently now than when I was just sitting on the floor trying to keep up with pushing my button. Now I know I've gone through the whole calendar every day. Me and Andy have gone through it. We've selected what needs to get laid aside. So much of our conference certainly can be aware that if a bill's going through on consent, that it's either passed unanimously in the past, or we look at the committee votes, whether there was any opposition in committee, and talk to the rankers. So even there now, I can miss one and have to go get caught up, because I'm trying to make sure everybody else is pushing their buttons and moving, because you get into those last days in June, and the two questions everybody's asking are, when are we getting out of here, and when is my local bill getting done? They want to make sure they have their bills all done before you leave. So the pace does get very, very rapid, and you just do your best to keep up with it. And if there's one that you're unsure of, you thankfully have a few minutes you can catch up after the roll call ends.
Is there anything else we didn't touch on that you want to talk about?
I think really just everything that goes into the chamber running on a day-to-day basis on both sides of the aisle, and you always knew that staff was working around the clock in March and June and all of that, but you see it a little bit more when you're kind of right in the thick of it, in terms of making sure we're prepared, and whether we're going through the night, and we had times we were doing those late sessions 2-3 days in a row at the end of session. So there really is a lot of logistics that goes into that. When the bills are finally together, we all look at it and say, okay, it's easier than maybe a few years back when we used to actually wait for every single one of those bills to be physically printed, put on the desk, and all of that. The constitutional change makes that a little easier, but nevertheless, there's still people that have to review all these bills, conferences and briefings that have to take place. So there's just a tremendous amount of work that goes into all of that. So I always respected what our staffs do for us, but I think I do even more so having been in the thick of seeing how things move down there.
Well, you mentioned the printing of the bills, and that makes me think of, there is still a lot of lag time in the assembly chamber when they're waiting for final agreements on stuff. And some people will begin like rubber band fights. Other people, do their private jobs on the floor, or whatever. But so you, as the in your capacity now, how do you stay entertained? Is it just trying to do your work, or what do you do to take a break from that so you don't go crazy?
I'll be honest. There are really no breaks. There's always something that time of year. For the most part, there's always something that we need to be doing. Sometimes it gives us an opportunity to just catch up. You get some of those days when you're getting a C and a D calendar after an A and a B, and you've gotten the A and the B in the middle of the night before. So you're really just kind of, it really is just an opportunity to catch up on bills and make sure that we've flag the right bills, talk to members of our conference if we have a question about a bill that went through, say, the committee they're the ranker on. So usually they keep us busy enough down there that we're not too much looking to kill time, or maybe just occasionally getting a chance to eat something.
Well, yeah. So, is there a snack in Wayne Jackson's desk drawer, the Sergeant at Arms, that you go to? Is there a go-to pick-me-up candy?
I have a not to get too descriptive, but I have a little bit of a lactose issue. But he always has these the dark chocolate Hershey's, which the dark chocolate doesn't bother me. So I've certainly had my fair share of those over the course of this session.
Gotcha. Well, Assemblyman, I really appreciate you taking the time to walk me through your process and reflect on some of these past sessions. Thank you so much.
No problem. It was a pleasure.
And that's our show. My thanks to Assemblyman Ed Ra for being my guest. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review wherever you download podcasts. It helps other people discover the show and means I have to write one less fake review from a friend's phone. Seriously, I'm running out of friends. Until next time, podcast adjourned.
Just heard I tried to get you.
This day sucks.